Hi everyone, Anthony Waves Tano here, the internet's waviest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Jamie XX album In Waves. Yep. Here we have the new album from UK-based producer, electronic music artist, DJ, Jamie XX, or James Thomas Smith, who originally broke onto the music scene as one-fourth of the XX, who at the time of their big break in the late 2000s were like the biggest, hottest indie and pop act to come out of the UK in a minute. But even as the band was in demand, Jamie didn't hesitate to lean into his viability as a solo artist, and many forget the very interesting move he made going in that direction early on. A remix album of songs from the final Gil Scott-Heron album, I'm New Here. Then several years later we would get Jamie's first real totally solo outing. That would be the album In Color, which at this point was released almost 10 years ago. But at the time of that record's release, it contained some of the most beautiful pop and electronic music fusions of that year, not to mention an absolutely transcendental Young Thug crossover that I am very blessed to live in the same timeline as. But yeah, In Color was an incredibly choppy but varied and unique album. So considering that and the star-studded array of singles that led up to the release of this new album, I honestly didn't really know what to expect from it. I mean, clearly Jamie sees some kind of line or continuum flowing throughout all or much of his work. If he didn't, I don't think he would go through the trouble of making so much of the album and single art line up in the way that it does. And now we're moving from being in color to being in waves. Ooh, the waves, we're waving now! And what does it mean to be in waves as opposed to in colors? The answer to that is probably more abstract than concrete when it comes to the conscious vision Jamie had going into this record. But what is for sure is that this new album is very much a different experience from its predecessor, embracing more vibrant instrumentation as well as more straightforward grooves right out of the house playbook. Jamie is also very much letting his features and samples take the spotlight a bit more on this record too, but also trying to bring more messaging to the table with these tracks as well, because while Jamie might not necessarily be in the business of writing lyrics, he is definitely trying to get something across on a lot of these songs. Sometimes that message is about as on the nose as it can get, like on Treat Each Other Right, which is obviously a song about approaching your fellow human beings with love and kindness. And sometimes the messages coming off these tracks are more contemplative and philosophical, like on Breather, which kind of feels like a combination of a dance floor odyssey but also a guided meditation piece. There's also All You Children, which very much tries to rekindle this sense of youthful hope and wonder. This track also brings an Avalanches feature, which I'm not too surprised about because it does feel like they are very much a clear point of reference when it comes to Jamie's approach to sampling on a few of these tracks, most notably The Feeling I Get From You. So needless to say on this record, Jamie's approach to crafting electronic dance tracks is still pretty left of center, even if some of the grooves on these tracks seem to be a bit more rooted in the classics. Now I will say, sometimes on this LP, I do think conceptually Jamie does go a little bit too deep into the weeds, to the point where he kind of loses me. He spends more time romanticizing the dance floor and conceptualizing it than he does actually like feeding it, which is most definitely the case for the closing track, Falling Together. And look, for electronic music producers, I think there's most definitely room for exactly this sort of thing, but this track is no Daft Punk Giorgio, I'll say that. In the track list, there's also a handful of less impactful cuts and moments that kind of feel like liminal spaces between the album's key anthems, like The Feeling I Get From You that I mentioned earlier, as well as Still Summer, or even to an extent Daffodil featuring Kelsey Luge on Glacier, as well as Panda Bear of Animal Collective fame, which does present an interesting sonic concept between all the interplay with all of the coalescing and jumbled vocal samples and guest contributions. The whole track feels like I'm having a weird dream and there are multiple voices trying to talk to me at once over a super relaxed bass line, and while the vibes are most certainly there, the whole track track doesn't really do much for me other than lull me into a chill sense of indifference. So beyond these tracks, though, what are the more consequential moments on the album? Well, there's Treat Each Other Right, which I mentioned earlier, which is a peppy, visceral UK bass cut with some killer soul samples. I love the multiple weird breaks where it kind of just goes straight into this sample of an entire song, chipmunked, right before it barrels back into this blissful combination of future garage and house. The whole track makes a stellar use of tension, effects, and space, and is kind of everything electronic dance music should be. There's also BADDY on the Floor, which has more of an old school garage house, funky type of flair, with its bright horn sections and nimble piano chord progressions. The choppy vocal samples add to a lot of the various switch-ups on the track too. But yeah, overall this track is just irresistible fun. It makes me want to be the baddie on the floor, and it could potentially be the soundtrack to the most memorable club night of your life. I think Jamie is scratching a similar itch as well on the track Life, featuring Swedish dance pop icon Robin, where we do have a similar instrumental formula going between the horns, the bouncy bass line, all the tension building, but Robin's vocals are enough to keep this tried and true recipe fresh. Then there's Breather, which more like banger. Honestly, this track sounds like a weird electronic Gorillaz B-side, and it develops into quite the journey with all of these orchestral bits, as well as, like I said earlier, that kind of spoken word guided meditation element that gives way to this awesome micro house-esque second half that is giving big quartet vibes. Then All You Children is another highlight for me, which I think is one of the best examples in terms of striking a balance between communicating the messages Jamie clearly wants to get across on this record, but still giving us something that functions as a piece of music that you could put on the dance floor and it would get people moving. It's thoughtful, but also not too heady or too much of a headphone listen. And before I finish this review off, I probably should mention the track Waited All Night, which of course features vocals from fellow The XX members Oliver Sim and Romy. Yeah, the band is really back together on this one, but the result of this track pretty much sounds like if some random super low-key DJ from the UK did a remix of an XX song. And just like a lot of the XX's music, the tune is not really sticking with me. The vocals come across as just too shy. I do think some of the jittery vocal sample chops and rhythmic switch-ups in the second half are very cool. That, at the very least, is interesting, but those musical and vocal elements that just remind me of the XX's typical vibe, I just don't get a whole lot from. Though I imagine for some longtime fans, the nostalgia factor on this track is just going to be too awesome to ignore, and you're gonna love this track regardless. But yeah, even if this record for Jamie, just like his last one, is a tad all over the place and inconsistent, it's still a very colorful and creative record with a lot of very notable highlights. Really some of the best and most fun and quirky dance tracks of the year, and ones that I can see myself continuing to spin as 2024 comes to a close, which is why I'm feeling a decent 7 on this record. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Jamie XX, forever.